by my Twitch channel. I'm Anne, and joining me for the first time.
And I'm Zoe. I was very excited.
So Zoe, this is your first time, but I think this is our last episode of The Hobbit.
Best for last.
Best for last. Best for last. And we did accidentally almost match.
Yes.
So it worked out perfectly. So before we get started, Zoe, what is your experience with the works of Tolkien?
The last time I read The Hobbit was in 6th grade. I've seen all the Hobbit movies, but I haven't seen all the Lord of the Rings movies.
Interesting.
I don't know how that happened. I think just because I was in high school, middle school, like when the Hobbit movies were coming out, and so Lord of the Rings it never happened for whatever reason.
First of all, I gotta watch them.
I will. I think I've seen the first one. The first Lord of the Rings movie.
Okay, so you saw Fellowship.
Yes.
Okay.
All
right. We can fix this.
Yeah, no. I figured.
But either way, so you have been in the background though when we've been doing these. So this is your first time.
Yeah, inside scoop.
Yeah, but you're usually in the background while we're filming anyways. So you have kind of some idea, but just as a reminder for all of you, last time they rid the mountain, Smaug is dead. The dwarves have fortified their position against the men and the elves who have come to try to claim the treasure, and we have some doubts about their morality, basically, because dragon treasure, everyone, like, it has an effect on people, and so everyone has kind of been like, but what about that treasure? What about that there treasure? And so it's not going well. Thorin is obviously not inclined to do anything for the King of the Elves because the King of the Elves kept him in prison for a long time. And is also feeling the effects of the dragon sickness. So, spoiler alert. But like I said, I think this will be our last episode of The Hobbit. So we'll take next week off to recuperate. And then we'll get started on Fellowship of the Ring, because we might as well keep this Tolkien train going. Keep this party going. All right, without further ado, chapter 16, A Thief in the Night. Now the days passed slowly and wearily. Many of the dwarves spent their time piling and ordering the treasure, and now Thorin spoke of the Arkenstone of Thrain. Oh right, also Bilbo stole that. Now Thorin spoke of the Arkenstone of Thrain and bade them eagerly to look for it in every corner. For the Arkenstone of my father, he said, is worth more than a river of gold in itself, and to me it is beyond price. That stone of all the treasure I name unto myself, and I will be avenged on anyone who finds it and withholds it. Bilbo heard these words, and he grew afraid, wondering what would happen if the stone was found, wrapped in an old bundle of tattered oddments that he used as a pillow. All the same, he did not speak of it, for as the weariness of the days grew heavier, the beginnings of a plan had come into his little head. Things had gone on like this for some time, when the ravens brought news that Dane and more than 500 dwarves, hurrying from the Iron Hills, were now within about 2 days' march of Dale, coming from the northeast. But they cannot reach the mountain unmarked, said Roic, and I fear lest there be battle in the valley. I do not call this counsel good. Though they are a grim folk, they are not likely to overcome the host that besets you. And even if they did so, what will you gain? Winter and snow is hastening behind them. How shall you be fed without the friendship and the goodwill of the lands about you? The treasure is likely to be your death, though the dragon is no more. But Thorin was not moved. Winter and snow will bite both men and elves, he said, and they may find their dwelling in the waste grievous to bear. With my friends behind them and winter upon them, they will perhaps be in the softer mood to parley with. That night Bilbo made up his mind. The sky was black and moonless. As soon as it was full dark, he went to a corner of an inner chamber just within the gate and drew from his bundle a rope and also the Arkenstone wrapped in a rag. Then he climbed to the top of the wall. Only Bombur was there, for it was his turn to watch, and the dwarves kept only one watchman at a time. It is mighty cold, said Bombur. I wish we could have a fire up here as they have in the camp. It is warm enough inside, said Bilbo. I dare say, but I'm bound here till midnight, grumbled the fat dwarf. A sorry business altogether. Not that I venture to disagree with Thorin, may his beard grow ever longer. Yet he was ever a dwarf with a stiff neck. Not as stiff as my legs, said Bilbo. I am tired of stairs and stone passages. I would give a good deal for the feel of grass at my toes. I would give a good deal for the feel of a strong drink in my throat for a soft bed after a good supper. Bumper. Always free food. I can't give you those while the siege is going on, but it is long since I watched, and I will take your turn for you if you like. There's no sleep in me tonight. You're a good fellow, Mr. Baggins, and I will take your offer kindly. If there should be anything to note, rouse me first, mind you. I will lie in the inner chamber to the left, not far away. Off you go, said Bilbo. I will wake you at midnight, and you can wake the next watchman. As soon as Bombur had gone, Bilbo put on his ring, fastened his rope, slipped down over the wall, and was gone. He had about 5 hours before him. Bombur would sleep. He could sleep at any time, and ever since the adventure in the forest, he was always trying to recapture the beautiful dreams he had then, and all the others were busy with Thorin. It was unlikely that any, even Fili or Kili, would come out on the wall until it was their turn. It was very dark, and the road after a while, when he left the newly made path and climbed down towards the lower course of the stream, was strange to him. At last he came to the bend where he had to cross the water if he was to make for the camp, as he wished. The bed of the stream was there shallow but already broad, and fording it in the dark was not easy for the little hobbit. He was nearly across when he missed his footing on a round stone and fell into the cold water with a splash. He had barely scrambled out on the far bank, shivering and sputtering, when up came elves in the gloom with bright lanterns and searched for the cause of the noise. That was no fish, one said. There's a spy about. Hide your lights. They will help him more than us, if it is that queer little creature that is said to be their servant. Servant indeed, snorted Bilbo, and in the middle of his snort he sneezed loudly, and the elves immediately gathered towards the sound. Let's have a light, he said. I am here if you want me, and he slipped off his ring and popped from behind a rock. They seized him quickly in spite of their surprise. Who are you? Are you the dwarves' hobbit? What are you doing? How did you get so far past our sentinels? They asked one after another. I am Mr. Bilbo Baggins, he answered. Companion of Thorin, if you want to know. I know your king well by sight, though perhaps he doesn't know me to look at. He was invisible the whole time he was in there. But Bard will remember me, and it is Bard I particularly want to see. Indeed, said they, and what may be your business? Whatever it is my own, my good elves. But if you wish ever to get back to your woods from this cold, cheerless place, he answered, shivering, you will take me along quick to a fire where I can dry, and then you will let me speak to your chiefs as quick as may be. I have only an hour or two to spare. That is how it came about that some 2 hours after his escape from the gate, Bilbo was sitting beside a warm fire in front of a large tent, and there sat two, gazing curiously at him, both the Elven King and Bard. A hobbit in elvish armor, partly wrapped in an old blanket, was something new to them. Really, you know, Bilbo was saying in his best business manner, things are impossible. Personally, I am tired of the whole affair. I wish I was back in the West in my own home, where folks are more reasonable. But I have an interest in this matter, 1/14 share to be precise, according to a letter which fortunately I believe I have kept. He drew from a pocket in his old jacket, which he still wore over his mail, crumpled and much folded, Thorin's letter that had been put under the clock on his mantelpiece in May. A share in the profits, mind you, he went on. I am aware of that. Personally, I'm only too ready to consider all your claims carefully and deduct what is right from the total before putting in my own claim. However, you don't know Thorin Openshield as well as I do now. I assure you, he's quite ready to sit on a heap of golden stars as long as you sit here. Well, let him, said Bard. Such a fool deserves to starve. Quite so, said Bilbo. I see your point of view. At the same time, winter is coming on fast. Before long, we'll be having snow and whatnot, and supplies will be difficult, even for elves, I imagine. Also, there will be other difficulties. You have not heard of Dane and the dwarves of the Iron Hills? We have, a long time ago, but what has he got to do with us? Asked the king. I thought as much. I see I have some information you have not got. Dane, I may tell you, is now less than 2 days' march off and has at least 500 grim dwarves with him. A good many of them have had experience in the dreadful dwarf and goblin wars, of which you've no doubt heard. When they arrive, there may be serious trouble. Why do you tell us this? Are you betraying your friends or are you threatening us? Asked Bard grimly. Good question. My dear Bard, squeaked Bilbo, don't be so hasty. I never met such suspicious folk. I am merely trying to avoid trouble for all concerned. Now I will make you an offer. Let us hear it, they said. You may see it, said he. It is this. And he drew forth the Arkenstone and threw away the wrapping. The Elven King himself, whose eyes were used to things of wonder and beauty, stood up in amazement. Even Bard gazed marveling at it in silence. It was as if a globe had been filled with moonlight and hung before them in a net woven of the glint of frosty stars. This is the Arkenstone of Thring, said Bilbo, the heart of the mountain, and it is also the heart of Thorin. He values it above a river of gold. I give it to you. It will aid you in your bargaining. Then Bilbo, not without a shudder, not without a glance of longing, handed the marvelous stone to Bard, and he held it in his hand as though dazed. But how is it yours to give? He asked at last with an effort. Oh, well, said the hobbit uncomfortably, it isn't exactly. But, well, I am willing to let it stand against all my claim, don't you know? I may be a burglar, or so they say. Personally, I never really felt like one. But I am an honest one, I hope, more or less. Anyway, I'm going back now, and the dwarves can do what they like to me. I hope you will find it useful. The Elven King looked at Bilbo with a new wonder. Bilbo Baggins, he said, you are more worthy to wear the armor of elf princes than many that have looked more comely in it. It's a real backhanded compliment. But I wonder if Thorin Oakenshield will see it so. I have more knowledge of dwarves in general than you have, perhaps. I advise you to remain with us, and here you shall be honored and thrice welcome. Thank you very much, I am sure, said Bilbo with a bow, but I don't think I ought to leave my friends like this, after all we've gone through together. And I promised to wake old Bomber at midnight, too. Really, I must be going, and quickly. Nothing they could say would stop him, so an escort was provided for him, and as he went, both the king and Bard saluted him with honor. As they passed through the camp, an old man, wrapped in a dark cloak, rose from a tent door where he was sitting and came towards them. Well done, Mr. Baggins, he said, clapping Bilbo on the back. There's always more about you than anyone expects. It was Gandalf. Gandalf showed back up. For the first time for many a day, Bilbo was really delighted, but there was no time for all the questions that he immediately wished to ask. All in good time, said Gandalf. Things are drawing towards the end now, unless I am mistaken. There is an unpleasant time just in front of you, but keep your heart up. You may come through all right. Nay. There's news brewing that even the ravens have not heard. Good night. Puzzled but cheered, Bilbo hurried on. He was guided to a safe ford and set across dry, and then he said farewell to the elves and climbed carefully back towards the gate. Great weariness began to come over him, but it was well before midnight when he clambered up the rope again. It was still where he had left it. He untied it and hid it, and then he sat down on the wall and wondered anxiously what would happen next. At midnight he woke up Bomber, and then in turn rolled himself up in his corner without listening to the old dwarf's thanks, which he felt he had hardly earned. He was soon fast asleep, forgetting all his worries till the morning. As a matter of fact, he was dreaming of eggs and bacon. Chapter 17, The Clouds Burst. Next day the trumpets rang early in the camp. Soon a single runner was seen hurrying along the narrow path. At a distance he stood and hailed them, asking whether Thorin would now listen to another embassy, since new tidings had come to hand and matters were changed. That will be Dane, said Thorin when he heard. They will have got wind of his coming. I thought that would alter their mood. Bid them come few in numbers and weaponless, and I will hear, he called to the messenger. About midday, the banners of the forest and the lake were seen to be borne forth again. A company of 20 was approaching. At the beginning of the narrow way, they laid aside sword and spear and came on towards the gate. Wondering, the dwarves saw that among them were both Bard and the Elven King, before whom an old man wrapped in cloak and hood bore a strong casket of iron-bound wood. Hail, Thorin, said Bard. Are you still of the same mind? My mind does not change with the rising and setting of a few suns, answered Thorin. Did you come to ask me idle questions? Still the elf host has not departed as I bade. Till then you have come in vain to bargain with me. Is there then nothing for which you would yield any of your gold? Nothing that you or your friends have to offer? One of the Arkenstone of Thrain, said he, and at the same moment the old man opened the casket and held aloft the jewel. The light leapt from his hand, bright and white in the morning. Then Thorin was stricken dumb with amazement and confusion. No one spoke for a long while. Thorin at last broke the silence, and his voice was thick with wrath. That stone was my father's and is mine, he said. Why should I purchase my own? But wonder overcame him, and he added, But how came you by the heirloom of my house, if there is need to ask such a question of thieves? We are not thieves, Bard answered. Your own we will give back to you in return for our own. How came you by it? Shouted Thorin in gathering rage. I gave it to them, squeaked Bilbo, who was peering over the wall, by now in a dreadful fright. You, cried Thorin, turning upon him and grasping him with both hands. You miserable hobbit, you undersized burglar, he shouted at a loss for words, and he shook poor Bilbo like a rabbit. By the beard of Durin, I wish I had Gandalf here. Curse him for his choice of you. May his beard wither. As for you, I will throw you to the rocks, he cried, and lifted Bilbo in his arms. Stay, your wish is granted, said a voice. The old man with the casket threw aside his hood and cloak. Here is Gandalf, and none too soon, it seems. If you don't like my burglar, please don't damage him. Put him down and listen first to what he has to say. You all seem to be in league, said Thorin, dropping Bilbo onto the top of the wall. Never again will I have dealings with any wizards or his friends. What have you to say, you descendant of rats?
Gee.
Dear me, said Bilbo. I'm sure this is all very uncomfortable. You may remember saying that I might choose my own 14th share. Perhaps I took it too literally. I have been told that dwarves are sometimes politer in word than in deed. The time was, all the same, when you seemed to think that I had been of some service, descendant of rats indeed. Is this all the service of you and your family that I was promised, Thorin? Take it that I have disposed of my share as I wished and let it go at that. I will, said Thorin grimly, and I will let you go at that, and may we never meet again. Then he turned and spoke over the wall. I am betrayed, he said. It was rightly guessed that I could not forbear to redeem the Arkenstone, the treasure of my house. For it I will give 1/14th share of the hoard in silver and gold, setting aside the gems, but that shall be accounted the promised share of this traitor. And with that reward he shall depart, and you can divide it as you will. He will get little enough, I doubt not. Take him if you wish him to live, and no friendship of mine goes with him. Get down now to your friends, he said Bilbo, or I will throw you down. What about the gold and silver, asked Bilbo. That shall follow after, as can be arranged, said he. Get down. Until then we keep the stone, cried Bard. You are not making a very splendid figure as king under the mountain, said Gandalf. But things may change yet. They may indeed, said Thorin, and already, so strong was the bewilderment of the treasure upon him, he was pondering whether by the help of Dane he might not recapture the Arkenstone and withhold the share of the reward. That dragon sickness, man. It'll get ya. And so Bilbo was swung down from the wall and departed with nothing for all his trouble except the armor which Thorin had given him already, which to be fair is worth more than the entire country he's from, so. More than one of the dwarves in their hearts felt shame and pity at his going. Farewell, he cried to them. We may meet again as friends. Be off, cried Thorin. You have mail upon you, which was made by my folk, and is too good for you. It cannot be pierced by arrows, but if you do not hasten, I will sting your miserable feet. So be swift. Not so hasty, said Bard. We will give you until tomorrow. At noon we will return and see if you have brought from the hoard the portion that is to be set against the stone. If that is done without deceit, then we will depart and the elf host will go back to the forest. In the meanwhile, farewell. With that they went back to the camp, but Thorin sent messengers by Roic telling Dane of what had passed, and bidding him come with wary speed. That day passed, and the night. The next day the wind shifted west, and the air was dark and gloomy. The morning was still early when a cry was heard in the camp. Runners came in to report that a host of dwarves had appeared from the eastern spur of the mountain, and was now hastening to Dale. Dane had come. He had hurried on through the night, and so had come upon them sooner than they had expected. Each one of his folk was clad in a hauberk of steel mail that hung to his knees, and his legs were covered with hose of a fine and flexible metal mesh, the secret of whose making was possessed by Dane's people. The dwarves are exceedingly strong for their height, but most of these were strong even for dwarves. In battle they wielded heavy two-handed mattocks, but each of them had also a short broadsword at his side and a round shield slung at his back. Their beards were forked and plaited and thrust into their belts. Their caps were of iron, and they were shod with iron, and their faces were grim. Very Scottish Highlands of them. The multiple weapon types. The big beards. It's perfect. Trumpets called for men and elves to arms. Before long, the dwarves could be seen coming up the valley at a great pace. They halted between the river and the eastern spur, but a few held on their way, and crossing the river drew near to camp. And there they laid down their weapons and held up their hands in sign of peace. Bard went out to meet them, and with him went Bilbo. We are sent from Dane, son of Nain, they said, when questioned. We are hastening to our kinsmen in the mountain, since we have learned that the kingdom of old is renewed. But who are you that sit in the plain as foes before defended walls? This, of course, in the polite and rather old-fashioned language of such occasions, meant simply, you have no business here. We are going on, so make way or we shall fight you. They meant to push on between the mountain and the loop of the river, for the narrow land there did not seem to be strongly guarded. Bard, of course, refused to allow the dwarves to go straight on to the mountain. He was determined to wait until the gold and silver had been brought out in exchange for the Arkenstone, for he did not believe that this would be done if once the fortress was manned with so large and warlike a company. They had brought with them a great store of supplies, for the dwarves can carry very heavy burdens, and nearly all of Dane's folk, in spite of their rapid march, bore huge packs on their backs in addition to their weapons. They would stand a siege for weeks, and by that time yet more dwarves might come, and yet more, for Thorin had many relatives. Also, they would be able to reopen and guard some other gate, so that the besiegers would have to encircle the whole mountain, and for that they had not sufficient numbers. These were, in fact, precisely their plans, for the raven messengers had been very busy between Thorin and Dane. But for the moment the way was barred, so after angry words the dwarf messengers retired, muttering in their beards. Bard then sent messengers at once to the gate, but they found no gold or payment. Arrows came forth as soon as they were within shot, and they hastened back in dismay. In the camp all was now astir as if for battle, for the dwarves of Dane were advancing along the eastern bank. Fools, laughed Bard, to come thus beneath the mountain's arm. They do not understand war above ground, whatever they may know of battle in the mines. There are many of our archers and spearmen now hidden on the rocks upon their right flank. Dwarf mail may be good, but they will soon be hard put to it. Let us set on them now from both sides before they are fully rested. But the Elven king said, long will I tarry ere I begin this war for gold. The dwarves cannot pass us unless we will, or do anything that we cannot mark. Let us hope still for something that will bring reconciliation. Our advantage in numbers will be enough, if in the end it must come to unhappy blows. But he reckoned without the dwarves. The knowledge of that the Arkenstone was in the hands of the besiegers burned in their thoughts. Also they guessed the hesitation of Bard and his friends and resolved to strike while they debated. Suddenly, without a signal, they sprang silently forward to attack. Bows twanged and arrows whistled. Battle was about to be joined. Still more suddenly, a darkness came on with dreadful swiftness. A black cloud hurried over the sky. Winter thunder on a wild wind rolled roaring up and rumbled in the mountain, and lightning lit its peak. And beneath the thunder, another blackness could be seen whirling forward, but it did not come with the wind. It came from the north, like a vast cloud of birds, so dense that no light could be seen between their wings. Halt! Cried Gandalf, who appeared suddenly and stood alone with arms uplifted between the advancing dwarves and the ranks awaiting them. Halt! He called in a voice like thunder, and his staff blazed forth with a flash like the lightning. Dread has come upon you all. Alas, it has come more swiftly than I guessed. The goblins are upon you. Bolg of the North is coming. He was the son of Azog, who was killed in the Dwarf and Goblin War. O Dane, whose father you slew in Moria. Sorry, I should have just kept it. Behold, the bats are above his army like a sea of locusts. They ride upon wolves, and wargs are in their train. Amazement and confusion fell upon them all. Even as Gandalf had been speaking, the darkness grew. The dwarves halted and gazed at the sky. The elves cried out with many voices. Come, called Gandalf, there is yet time for counsel. Let Dane, son of Maine, come swiftly to us. So began a battle that none had expected, and it was called the Battle of 5 Armies, and it was very terrible. Upon one side were the goblins and the wild wolves, and upon the other were elves and men and dwarves. This is how it fell out. Ever since the fall of the great goblin in the Misty Mountains, the hatred of their race for the dwarves had been rekindled to fury. Messengers had passed to and fro between all their cities, colonies, and strongholds, for they resolved now to win the dominion of the north. Tidings they had gathered in secret ways, and in all the mountains there was a forging and an arming. Then they marched and gathered by hill and valley, going ever by tunnel or underdark, until around and beneath the great mountain Gundabad of the north, which was their capital, a vast host was assembled, ready to sweep down in time of storm unawares upon the south. There they learned of the death of Smaug, and joy was in their hearts, and they hastened night after night through the mountains, and came thus at last on a sudden from the north hard on the heels of Dane. Not even the ravens knew of their coming until they came out in the broken lands which divided the lonely mountain from the hills behind. How much Gandalf knew cannot be said, but it is plain that he had not expected this sudden assault. This is the plan that he made in council with the Elven King and with Bard, and with Dane, for the Dwarf Lord now joined them. The goblins were the foes of all, and at their coming all other quarrels were forgotten. Their only hope was to lure the goblins into the valley between the arms of the mountain, and themselves to man the great spurs that struck south and east. Yet this would be perilous if the goblins were in sufficient numbers to overrun the mountain itself, and so attack them also from behind and above. But there was no time to make any other plan or to summon any help. Soon the thunder passed, rolling away to the southeast, but the bat cloud came flying lower over the shoulder of the mountain and whirled above them, shutting out the light and filling them with dread. To the mountain, called Bard, to the mountain! Let us take our places while there is yet time. On the southern spur, in its lower slopes and in the rocks at its feet, the elves were set. On the eastern spur were men and dwarves. But Bard and some of the nimblest men and elves climbed to the height of the eastern shoulder to gain a view to the north. Soon they could see the lands before the mountain's feet black with a hurrying multitude. Ere long the vanguard swirled round the spur's end and came rushing into Dale. These were the swiftest wolf riders, and already their cries and howls rent the air afar. A few brave men were strung before them to make a feint of resistance, and many there fell before the rest drew back and fled to either side. As Gandalf had hoped, the goblin army had gathered behind the resisted vanguard and poured now in rage into the valley, driving wildly up between the arms of the mountain, seeking for the foe. Their banners were countless, black and red, and they came on like a tide in fury and disorder. It was a terrible battle, the most dreadful of all Bilbo's experiences, and the one which at the time he hated most, which is to say it was the one that he was most proud of and most fond of recalling long afterwards, although he was quite unimportant in it. Actually, I may say he put on his ring early in the business and vanished from sight, if not from all danger. A magic ring of that sort is not a complete protection in a goblin charge, nor does it stop flying arrows and wild spears, but it does help in getting out of the way, and it prevents your head from being specially chosen for a sweeping stroke by a goblin swordsman. The elves were the first to charge. Their hatred for the goblins is cold and bitter. Their spears and swords shone in the gloom with a gleam of chill flame, so deadly was the wrath of the hands that held them. As soon as the host of their enemies was dense in the valley, they sent against it a shower of arrows, and each flickered as it fled, as if with stinging fire. Behind the arrows, 1,000 of their spearmen leapt down and charged. The yells were deafening. The rocks were stained black with goblin blood. Just as the goblins were recovering from the onslaught and the elf charge was halted, there rose from across the valley a deep-throated roar. With cries of Moria and Dane, Dane, the dwarves of the Iron Hills plunged in, wielding their mattocks upon the other side, and beside them came the men of the lake with long swords. Panic now came upon the goblins, and even as they turned to meet this new attack, the elves charged again with renewed numbers. Already many of the goblins were flying back down the river to escape from the trap, and many of their own wolves were turning upon them and rending the dead and the wounded. Victory seemed at hand when a cry rang out on the heights above. Goblins had scaled the mountain from the other side, and already many were on the slopes above the gate, and others were streaming down recklessly, heedless of those that fell screaming from cliffs and precipice, to attack the spurs from above. Each of these could be reached by paths that ran down from the main mass of the mountain in the center, and the defenders had too few to bar the way for long. Victory now vanished from hope. They had only stemmed the first onslaught to the black tide. Day drew on. The goblins gathered again in the valley. Their host of wargs came ravening, and with them came the bodyguard of Bold, goblins of huge size with scimitars of steel. Soon actual darkness was coming into a stormy sky, while still the great bats swirled about the heads and ears of elves and men, or fastened vampire-like on the stricken. Now Bard was fighting to defend the eastern spur, and yet giving slowly back, and the elf lords were at bay about their king upon the southern arm, near to the watchpost on Ravenhill. Suddenly there was a great shout, and from the gate came a trumpet call. They had forgotten Thorin. Part of the wall, moved by levers, fell outward with a crash into the pool. Out leapt the king under the mountain. Sorry, I'm feeling emotion. And his companions followed him. Hood and cloak were gone. They were in shining armor, and red light leapt from their eyes. In the gloom, the great dwarf gleamed like gold in a dying fire. Rocks were hurled down from on high by the goblins above, but they held on, leapt down to the fall's foot, and rushed forward to battle. Wolf and rider fell or fled before them. Thorin wielded his axe with mighty strokes, and nothing seemed to harm him. To me, elves and men, to me, O my kinsfolk, he cried, and his voice shook like a horn in the valley. Down, heedless of order, rushed all the dwarves of Dane to his help. Down, too, came many of the lake men, for Bard could not restrain them, and out upon the other side came many of the spearmen of the elves. Once again the goblins were stricken in the valley, and they were piled in heaps till Dale was dark and hideous with their corpses. The wargs were scattered, and Thorin drove right against the bodyguard of Bold, but he could not pierce their ranks. Already behind him, among the goblin dead, lay many men and many dwarves, and many a fair elf that should have lived yet long ages merrily in the wood. And as the valley widened, his onset grew ever slower. His numbers were too few. His flanks were unguarded. Soon the attackers were attacked, and they were forced into a great ring, facing every way, hemmed all about with goblins and wolves returning to the assault. The bodyguard of Bold came howling against them, and drove in upon their ranks like waves upon cliffs of sand. Their friends could not help them, for the assault from the mountain was renewed with redoubled force, and upon either side men and elves were being slowly beaten down. On all this Bilbo looked with misery. He had taken his stand on Ravenhill among the elves, partly because there was more chance of escape from that point, and partly the more Tookish part of his mind, because if he was going to be in a last desperate stand, he preferred on the whole to defend the Elven King. Don't know why, but okay. I feel like that's some revisionist history. Gandalf too, I may say, was there, sitting on the ground as if in deep thought, preparing, I suppose, some last blast of magic before the end. That did not seem far off. It will not be long now, thought Bilbo, before the goblins win the gate. We are all slaughtered or driven down and captured. Really, it is enough to make one weep after all one has gone through. I would rather old Smaug had been left with all the wretched treasure than that these vile creatures should get it, and poor old Bomber and Balin and Fili and Kili and all the rest come to a bad end, and Bard too, and the Lake Men and the Merry Elves. Misery me! I've heard songs of many battles, and I've always understood that defeat may be glorious. It seems very uncomfortable, not to say distressing. I wish I was well out of it. The clouds were torn by the wind, and a red sunset slashed the west. Seeing the sudden gleam in the gloom, Bilbo looked round. He gave a great cry. He had seen a sight that made his heart leap. Dark shapes, small yet majestic against the distant glow. The eagles! The eagles! He shouted. The eagles are coming! Bilbo's eyes were seldom wrong. The eagles were coming down from the wind, line after line, in such a host as must have been gathered from all the Eyries of the north. The eagles, Bilbo cried, dancing and waving his arms. If the elves could not see him, they could hear him. Soon they too took up the cry, and it echoed across the valley. Many wondering eyes looked up, though as yet nothing could be seen except from the southern shoulders of the mountains. The eagles! Cried Bilbo once more, but at that moment a stone hurtling from above smote heavily on his helmet, and he fell with a crash and knew no more. But here we go, the final chapter.
The return journey. When Bilbo came to himself, he was literally by himself. He was lying in the flat stones of Ravenhill, and no one was near. A cloudless day, but cold, was broad above him. He was shaking and as chilled as stone, but his head burned with fire. Now I wonder what has happened, he said to himself. At any rate, I am not yet one of those fallen heroes, but I suppose there is still enough time for that. He sat up painfully. Looking into the valley, he could see no living goblins. After a while, as his head cleared a little, he thought he could see elves moving in the rocks below. He rubbed his eyes. Surely there was a camp still in the plain some distance off, and there was some coming about going to the gate. Dwarves seemed to be busy removing the wall, but all was deadly still. There was no call and no echo of a song. Sorrow seemed to be in the air. Victory after all, I suppose, he said, feeling his aching head. Well, it seems like a very gloomy business. Suddenly he was aware of a man climbing up and coming towards him. Hello there, he called with a shaky voice. Hello there, what's news? What voice is that speaks among the stones?
Wait.
Said the man, halting and peering above him not far where Bilbo sat. Then Bilbo remembered his ring. Well, I'm blessed, said he. This invisibility has its drawbacks after all. Otherwise, I suppose I might have spent a warm and comfortable night in bed.
Yeah, seriously.
It's me, Bilbo Baggins, companion of Thorin, he cried, hurriedly taking off the ring. It is well that I have found you, said the man striding forward. You are needed, and we have looked for you long. You would have seen numbered among the dead, who are many, if Gandalf the Wizard had not said that your voice was last heard in this place. I have been sent to look here for the last time. Are you much hurt? A nasty knock on the head, I think, said Bilbo. I have a helm and a hard skull. All the same, I feel sick and my legs feel like straws. Very like...
He survived the battle, at least.
Sure. I will carry you down to the camp in the valley, said the man, and picked him lightly up. The man was swift and sure-footed. It was not long before Bilbo was set down in a tent of Dale, and there stood Gandalf with his arm in a sling. Even the wizard had not escaped without a wound, and there were few unharmed all the host. I'd be surprised if there was
no injuries.
No injuries.
I mean, yeah, they literally said people died, so
sure. When Gandalf saw Bilbo, he was delighted. Baggins, he exclaimed. Well, I never. Alive after all, I am glad. I began to wonder if even your luck would see you through. A terrible business, and it was nearly as disastrous. But other news can wait. Come, he said more gravely. You are called for. And leading the hobbit, he took him within the tent. Hail, Thorin, he said as he entered. I had brought him. There indeed lay Thorin Oakenshield, wounded with many wounds, and his rent armor and notched axe were cast upon the floor. He looked up as Bilbo came beside him. Farewell, good thief, he said. I go now to the halls of waiting to sit behind my fathers until the world is renewed. Since I leave now all gold and silver, and go where it is of little worth, I wish to part in friendship for you, and I would take behind my words and deeds at the gate. Bilbo knelt on one knee, was filled with sorrow. Farewell, King, unto the mountain, he said. This is a bitter adventure, if it must end so, and not a mountain of gold can amend it. Yet I am glad that I have shared in your perils. There has been more than any Baggins deserved. No, said Thorin, there is more of you good than you know, child of the kindly West. Some courage and some wisdom blended in measure. If more of us valued food and cheer, and song above the hoard of gold, it would be a merrier world. But sad or merry, I must leave it now. Farewell. Then Bilbo turned away, and he went by himself and sat alone wrapped in a blanket. And whether you believe it or not, he wept until his eyes were red and his voice was hoarse. He was a kindly little soul. Indeed, it was long before he had the heart to make a joke again. A mercy it is, he said at last to himself, that I woke when I did. I wish Thorin were living, but I am glad we parted in kindness. You are a fool, Bilbo Baggins, and you made a great mess of that business with the stone. And there was a battle, in spite of all your efforts, to buy peace and quiet, but I suppose you can hardly be blamed for that. All that had happened after he was stunned, Bilbo learned later, but it gave him more sorrow than joy, and he was now weary of his adventure. He was aching in his bones for the homeward journey. That, however, was a little delayed, and so in the meantime, I will tell something of the events. The eagles had long had suspicion of the goblins' mustering. From their watchfulness, the movements in the mountains could not be altogether hid. So they too had gathered in great numbers under the great eagle of the misty mountains, and at length smelling battle from afar, after they had come speeding down in the gale of the nick of time. They it was who had dislodged the goblins from the mountain slopes, casting them over precipices, or driving them down, shrieking and bewildered among those foes. It was not long after they had freed the lonely mountain that and elves and men on either side of the valley could come at last to help in the battle below. But even with the eagles, they were still outnumbered. In last hour, Bjorn himself had appeared. No one knew how or from where. He came alone and in bare shape, and he seemed to have grown almost to a giant size in his wrath.
He hates goblins.
Right, sure. The roar of his voice was like drums and guns, and he tossed wolves and goblins from paths like straws and feathers. He fell from among the rear and broke like a clap of thunder through the ring. The dwarves were making a standstill about their lords upon a rounded hill. Then Bjorn stooped and lifted Thorin, who had fallen pierced with spears, and bore him out of fray. Swiftly he returned, and his wrath was redoubled, so that nothing could withstand him, and no weapon seemed to bite upon him. He scattered the bodyguard and pulled down Bolg. Yeah, thank you. And pulled Bolg himself and crushed him. Then dismay fell on the goblins, and they fled in all directions. But weariness left their enemies, with them coming of a new hope, and they pursued them closely and prevented them most of them from escaping when they could. They drove many of them into the running river, and such as fled south or west, they hunted into the marshes about the river. About the forest river. These like long sentences are like,
you gotta take the breaks when you see the commas, because otherwise you will. I'm be like, the forest river.
Thank you. And there was the greatest part of the last fugitives perished, while those came hurriedly the wood elves round where they're slain, or drawn in to die deep in the trackless dark of Mirkwood. Songs had said there were 3 parts of the goblin warriors of the north perished on that day, and the mountains had peace for many a year. Victory had been assured before the fall of the night, but pursuit was still on foot, and Bilbo returned to the camp, and not many were in the valley, save more grievously wounded. Where are the eagles? He asked Gandalf that evening, as he lay wrapped in many warm blankets. Some are in the hunt, said the wizard, but most of them have gone back to their eyries. They would not stay here, and departed within the first light of morning. Dane had crowned their chief with gold, and sworn friendship with them forever. I'm sorry. I should have liked to see them again, said Bilbo sleepily. Perhaps I shall see them on the way home. I support I shall be going home soon. As soon as you like, said the wizard. Actually, it was some days before Bilbo really set out. That's me.
Yeah. Also, you have to say goodbye to all these people and get all that gold. There's a lot to do.
They buried Thorin deep beneath the mountain, and Bard laid out the Arkenstone upon his breast. There let it lie, the mountain falls, he said. May it bring good fortune to all his folk that dwell hereafter. Upon his tomb, the elven king there laid Orcust, thank you. Upon his tomb, the elven king laid Orcust, the elvish sword that had been taken from Thorin in captivity. It is said in songs that gleamed in the dark if foes approached, and the fortress of the dwarves could not be taken by surprise. There now Dane, son of Main, took his abode, and became king under the mountain, and in time many other dwarves gathered to his throne in ancient halls. Of the 12 companions of Thorin, 10 remained. Fili and Kili had fallen defending him with shield and body, for he was their mother's eldest brother. The others remained with Dane, for Dane dealt with his treasure well. There was, of course, no longer any question of dividing the hoard in such shares that had been planned. To Balin and Dwalin, and Dori and Nori and Ori, and Oin and Glone,
Oin and Boyd.
and Biffer and Bofer and Bomber, or to Bilbo. Yet a 14th share of all the silver and gold, wrought and unwrought, was given up to Bard, for Dane said, "We will honor the agreement of the dead, and he has now the Arkenstone in his keeping." Even a 14th share of wealth was exceedingly great, greater than that of many mortal kings. For the treasure, Bard sent much gold to the master of Lake Town, and he rewarded his followers and friends freely. To the Elven King, he gave the emeralds of Urien, such jewels as most loved, which Dane had restored to him. To Bilbo he said, "This treasure is as much yours as it is mine. Through old agreements cannot stand, since so many have a claim to its winning and defense. Yet even though you were willing to lay aside all your claim, I should wish that the words of Thorin, of which you repented, should not prove true. That we will give you little. I would reward you the most richly of all." "Very kind of you," said Bilbo, "but it really is a relief to me. How on earth should I have gotten all this treasure home without war and murder along the way?
Yeah.
I don't know. And I do not know what I should have done without it when I got home. I am sure it is better in your hands." In the end, he would only take 2 small chests, one filled with silver and the other with gold, such as one strong pony could carry. "There will be quite as much as I can manage," said he. At last, the time came for him to say goodbye to all of his friends. "Farewell, Balin," he said, "and farewell, Dwalin, and farewell, Dori, and Orin, Oin, Gloin, Biffer, Bofer, and Bomber.
Good job.
May your beards never grow thin." That's like such a great compliment.
Never grow thin.
And turning towards the mountain, he added, "Farewell, Thorin, Oak, and Shield, and Fili and Kili. May your memory never fade." Then the dwarves bowed low before the gate, but words were stuck in their throats. "Goodbye and good luck wherever you fare," said Balin at last. "If ever you visit us again, when our halls are made fair once more, then the feast shall indeed be splendid. If ever you are passing my way," said Bilbo, "don't wait to knock. Tea is at 4, but if any of you are welcome at any time." Then he turned away. The elf host was on the march, and had sadly lessened, yet many were glad, for now the northern world will be merrier for many a long day. The dragon was dead, and the goblins overthrown, and their hearts looked forward after winter to a spring of joy. Gandalf and Bilbo rode in behind the Elven King, and beside them strode Bjorn, once again in a man's shape, and he laughed and he sang in a loud voice upon the road. So they went until they drew near to the borders of Mirkwood, to the north of the place where the forest river ran out. Then they halted, for the wizard and Bilbo would not enter the wood, even though the king bade them stay while in his halls.
You know what? We have bad times there.
They intended to go along the edge of the forest and round its northern end in the waste that lay between it and the beginning of the Grey Mountains. It was a long and cheerless road, but now the goblins were crushed. It seemed safer than the dreaded pathways under the trees. Moreover, Bjorn was going that way too. "Farewell, O Elven King," said Gandalf. "Merry be Greenwood, and the world is yet young, and merry be all your folk." "Farewell, O Gandalf," said the king. "May you ever appear when you are most needed and least expected."
That's correct.
"The oftener you appear in my halls, the better I shall be pleased." I beg of you," said Bilbo, stammering and standing on one foot, "to accept this gift." And he brought out the necklace of silver and pearls that Dane had given him in their parting. "In what way have I earned such a gift, O Hobbit?" said the king. "Well, I thought, don't you know," said Bilbo, rather confused, "that some little return should be made for your hospitality."
I did steal a lot from you.
I mean, even a burglar has his feelings. I have drunk much of your wine and eaten much of your bread. "I will take your gift, O Bilbo the Magnificent." That's a great nickname.
Bilbo the Magnificent. Don't tell anyone in the Shire, though.
said the king bravely. "And I name your elf friend and blessed. May your shadow never grow less, or stealing would be too easy. Farewell. Then the elves turned towards the forest, and Bilbo started his long road home. He had many hardships and adventures before he got back. The wild was still the wild, and there were many other things in those days besides goblins. But he was well guided and well guarded. The wizard was with him, and Bjorn for much of the way, and he was never in great danger again. Anyway, by midwinter, Gandalf and Bilbo had come all the way back along both edges of the forest to down of Bjorn's house. And there for a while they both stayed. Yuletide was warm and merry there, and the men came from far and wide to Bjorn's bidding. The goblins of the Misty Mountains were now few and terrified, and hidden in the deepest holes they could find, and the wargs had vanished from the woods, so that the men were abroad without fear. Bjorn indeed became a great chief afterwards in those regions, and ruled a wide land between the mountains and the wood. And it is said for many generations the men of his line had the power of taking a bear shape, and some were grim men and bad, and most were in the heart like Bjorn, if left in size and strength. In their day, the goblins were hunted from the Misty Mountains, and a new peace came over by the edge of the wild. It was spring, and a fair one with mild weathers and a bright sun, before Bilbo and Gandalf took their leave at last of Bjorn. And though he longed for home, Bilbo left with regret, for the flowers of the gardens of Bjorn were in springtime, no less marvelous than in high summer. At last they came up the long road and reached the very pass where goblins had captured them before. But they came to a high point at morning. Looking backward, they saw the white sun shining over the outstretched lands. There behind lay Wormwood, blue in the distance and darkly green at the nearer edge even in the spring. There far away was the lonely mountain on the edge of eyesight. On its highest peak, snow yet unmelted was gleaming pale. So comes snow after fire, and even dragons have their endings, said Bilbo. He turned his back on adventure. The Tookish part was getting very tired, and the Baggins was daily getting stronger. I wish now only to be in my own armchair, he said. The last stage. It was on May the 1st that the two of them came back at last to the brink of the valley of Rivendell, where stood the last, or the first, homely house.
Depending on where you're coming from, I guess.
Again it was evening. Their ponies were tired, especially the one that carried the baggage, and they felt in need of rest. I would too.
Yeah.
Yeah. As they rode down the steep path, Bilbo heard the elves still singing in the trees, as if they had not stopped since he left. And as soon as the riders came down of the lower glades of wood, they burst into song of much the same kind as before. This is something like it. The dragon is withered, the bones are now crumbled. His armor is shivered, his splendor is humbled. Through sword shall be rushed, and thorn and crown perished. With strength the men trusted, and wealth they cherish. Here grass is growing, and leaves are yet swinging, the white water flowing, and the elves are yet singing. Come, tra-la-lally, come back to the valley.
Come, tra-la-lally, back to the valley.
Those are bars.
Yes.
The stars are far brighter than gems without measure. The moon is far whiter than silver and treasure. The fire is more shining on hearth in the gloaming than gold won them by mining. So why go a roaming? Oh, tra-la-lally, come back to the valley. Oh, where are you going so late in returning? The river is flowing and the stars are all burning. Oh, whither so laden, so sad and so dreary. Here elf and elf maiden, now come, welcome the weary. With tra-la-lally, come back to the lolly. Tra-la-lally, fa-la-lally, fa-la.
Ta-da!
Then the elves of the valley came out and greeted them, and led them across the water to the house of Elrond. There was a warm welcome that made them, and there were many eager ears that evening to hear tale of their adventures. Gandalf it was who spoke, for Bilbo was fallen quiet and drowsy. Most of the tale he knew, for he had been in it, and had himself told much of it to the wizard of the homeward way, or in the house of Bjorn. But every now and again he would open one eye and listen, when as a part of the story he did not know came in. It was in this way that he learned that Gandalf had been too, for he overheard that the words of the wizard to Elrond. It appeared that Gandalf had been great counsel of the White Wizards, master of lore and good magic, and that they had last driven the necromancer from the dark hold in the south of Mirkwood. Ere long now, Gandalf was saying, the forest will grow somewhat more wholesome. The north will be freed for that horror for many long years, I hope. Yet I wish he was banished from the world. It would be well indeed, said Elrond. but I fear that will not come in this age of the world or for many after.
Stay tuned for Return of the King.
When the tale of their journeyings was told, there were other tales, and yet more tales, tales of long ago, and tales of new things, and tales of no time at all. Till Bilbo's head fell forward on his chest and he snored comfortably in the corner. He woke to find himself in a white bed and the moon shining through an open window. Below it, many elves were singing loud and clear on the banks of the stream.
I forgot to give you all the songs.
That's okay. Sing all ye joyfully, now sing all together. The wings in the treetop, the wings in the heather. It's like reading the italics.
Yeah.
Okay. The stars are in blossom, the moon is in flower, and brighten the windows of night in her tower. Dance all ye joyful, now dance all together. Soft in the grass, and let the foot beat like a feather. The river is in silver, the shadows are fleeting. Merry is Maytime, and merry our meeting. Sing we now softly, and dreams let us weave him. Wing in the slumber, and let us leave him. The wanderer sleepeth, now soft be his pillow. Lullaby, lullaby, alder and willow. Sigh no more pine till the wind of the morn. Fall moon, dark be the land. Hush, hush, oak, ash, and thorn. Hushed be all the water till dawn is at hand. Well, merry people, said Bilbo looking out, what time by the moon is this? Your lullaby would awaken a drunken goblin, and yet I thank you. And your snores would waken a stone. Oh, jeez. And your snores would waken a stone dragon, yet we thank you. My God.
Elves.
They answered with laughter. It is the drawing towards dawn, and you have slept now since the night beginning. Tomorrow, perhaps, you'll be cured of weariness. A little sleep does great cure in the house of Elrond, said he, but I will take all the cure I can get. A second good night, fair friends. And with that, he went back to bed and slept till morning.
Like, Elrond's house sounds dope. It's dope. Just dope.
Yeah, like, can I, spend a night there?
Yeah, and then you go, you hang out, you listen to some songs, you hear some stories, you can sleep wherever you want, you get good food.
It seems like you just, pass out, too.
Yeah, and it's, particularly restorative rest. I love it.
I need some of that.
I need some of that, yeah.
Weariness fell from him soon in that house, and he had a merry jest and dance, early and late, with the elves of the valley. Yet even the place could not long delay him now, and he thought always of his own home. After a week, therefore, he said farewell to Elrond, and giving him such small gifts as he would accept, he rode away with Gandalf. Even as they left the valley, the sky darkened in the west before them, and the wind and the rain came to meet them. Merry is Maytime, said Bilbo, as the rain beat into his face. But our back is to the legends, and we are coming home. I suppose this is the first taste of it. There is a long road yet, said Gandalf, but this is the last road, said Bilbo. They came up to the river and marked the very edge of the borderland of the wild, and to the ford beneath this steep bank, which you may remember. The water was swollen both with the melting of the snows at the approach of summer, and with the day-long rain, but they crossed with some difficulty and pressed forward as the evening fell on the last stage of their journey. This was much as it had been before, except the company was smaller and more silent. Also this time, there were the trolls.
Yeah. Thank goodness. Can you imagine if they came back and there were 3 more trolls? What? Where are you coming from?
I'd be like, please, it just needs some peace and quiet.
Please.
I just want to get home.
I'm so done.
At each point on the road, Bilbo recalled the happenings and the words of a year ago. It seemed to him more like 10, so that, of course, he quickly noted the place where the pony had fallen in the river, and he had turned aside for their nasty adventure with Tom, Bert, and Bill. Not
those were the trolls.
Oh, gotcha.
They were named Tom, Bert, and Bill.
Great names.
I know.
Not far from the road, they had found the gold of the trolls, which they had buried, still hidden and untouched. I have enough to last me my time, said Bilbo, which they had dug it up. You had better take this, Gandalf. I dare say you could find a use for it. Indeed I can, said the wizard, but share and share alike. You may have found more needs than you may expect.
Pretty soon you're going to have a nephew come stay with you.
Right. So they put the golds in bags and slung them on the ponies, for who were not pleased at all about it. I was either, please.
Seriously, more?
After that, their going was slower, for most of the time they walked. But the land was green, and there was much grass, through which the hobbit strolled contently. He mopped his face with red silk handkerchief. No, not a single one of his own had survived. He had borrowed this one from Elrond.
He left without one. in the first place.
Where did this come from?
Yeah. He literally ran off without a handkerchief at the beginning, so he had none to take with him.
And he's taking everything, and people are giving him things.
He is a burglar.
For now, June had brought summer, and the weather was bright and hot again. As all these things come to an end, even this story, a day came at last when they were in sight of the country where Bilbo had been born and bred, where the shapes of the land and the trees were well known to him as the hands on his toes. Coming to a rise, he could see his own hill in the distance, and he stopped suddenly and said,
"The road goes ever on and on, down the door where it began. By cares and by caves where never sun has shone, by streams that never find the sea, over snow by winter sown, and through the merry flowers of June, over grass and over stone, and under mountains in the moon. Roads go ever on and on, under cloud and under stars, yet feet that wandering have gone, turn at last to home afar. Eyes that fire and swords have seen, and horror in the halls of stone, look at last on meadows green, and trees and hills they long have known." There's more, I think. No, we're good.
Beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you, Tolkien.
Right, sure. Gandalf looked at him. "My dear Bilbo," he said, "something is the matter with you. You are not the hobbit that you were."
Mm-hmm.
And so they crossed the bridge and passed the mill by the river and came back to Bilbo's own door. "Bless me! What's going on?" he cried.
This is one last thing.
There was a great commotion, and people of all sorts, respectable and unrespectable, were thick round the door, and many were going in and out, not even wiping their feet on the mat, as Bilbo noticed with annoyance. If he was surprised, there were more surprised still. He had arrived back in the middle of an auction.
Yep.
There was a large notice in black and red hung on the gate, stated that on June the 22nd, Messrs. Grube and Burrows would sell by auction the effects of the late Bilbo Baggins Esquire.
Yeah, he got declared dead.
I mean, I would think so too.
He's been gone for over a year.
I'd be like, yeah, this guy is dead. Like, there's no way that he survived. Underhill Hobbit Town. Sale to the commence at 10 o'clock sharp. It is now nearly lunchtime, and most of the things have been sold for various prices from next to nothing to old songs, and it is not unusual at auctions. Bilbo's cousins, the Sackville Bagginses, were in fact busy measuring his rooms to see if their own furniture would fit. In short, Bilbo was presumed dead, and not everybody was so sorry to find this presumption wrong. They're like, man, we wanted this place.
One of the stuff, yeah, the Sackville Bagginses in particular really wanted to inherit. So
I mean, if he's been there a long time and he's like been gone a while, I also would be like, yeah.
For over a year.
So like, what's the rent on this place?
Oh, like, it's paid off. It's paid off.
Right,
yeah.
exactly. Like,
I mean, I too would be like,
I don't have to pay utilities.
This is mine. Okay.
The return of Mr. Baggins created quite a disturbance, both under the hill and over the hill, and across the water. It was a great deal more than 9 days' wonder. The legal bother, indeed, lasted years.
Yeah, seriously. You gotta get all your stuff back.
It was quite a long time before Mr. Baggins was in fact admitted to be alive again. Not an imposter, I promise. The people who had yet specially gone bargains at the sale took a deal of convincing, and in the end, to save time, Bilbo had to buy back quite a lot of his own furniture. Like, just get new stuff at that point. Like, maybe you need to
I guess it's like a little hard to do that, and I guess to be fair, a lot of it is like ancestral furniture.
I see.
So I think there's some like.
But also, like, girl, move on. Like,
yes, girl, move on. Who cares if this was $100? Move on.
Many of his silver spoons mysteriously disappeared and were never accounted for.
Sackville Bagginses.
Personally, yeah, he suspected the Sackville Bagginses. On their side, they never admitted that they returned Bagginses were genuine, and they were not on friendly terms with Bilbo ever after. They really wanted to live in their nice hobbit hole so very much.
He really wanted the house.
Indeed, Bilbo found he had lost more than spoons. He had lost his reputation. It is true, for he ever remained an elf friend, and had the honor of dwarves, wizards, and all such folk as ever passed away, but he was no longer quite respectable. He was in fact held by all hobbits of the neighborhood to be queer, except by his nephews and nieces on the Took side, but even they were not encouraged in their friendship by the elders. I am sorry to say, he did not mind. He was quite content. And the sound of the kettle on his hearth, thank you,
It's okay.
was ever after more musical than ever in the quiet days before the unexpected party. His sword he hung over the mantelpiece. His coat of mail was arranged on the stand in the hall until he lent it to a museum. His gold and silver was largely spent in presents, both useful and extravagant, which to a certain extent accounts for the affection of his nephews and his nieces. His magic ring he kept a great secret, for he chiefly used it when unpleasant callers came.
Yeah. Oh, I'm not here. Hi.
I promise
Literally
you
visibility.
didn't see me. He took to writing poetry and visiting the elves, and through many shook their heads and touched their foreheads, said, "Poor old Baggins."
He's lost his marbles.
And through few many believed any of his tales, he remained happy to the end of his days, and those were extraordinarily long. One autumn evening, some years afterwards, Bilbo was sitting in his study writing his memoirs, and thought of calling them There and Back Again, A Hobbit's Holiday. There could be some work on that title, I think.
It's technically There and Back Again, Hobbit's Tale, Bilbo Baggins.
Where there was a ring at the door. It was Gandalf and a dwarf, and the dwarf was actually Balin. Come in, said Bilbo, and soon they were settled in chairs by the fire. If Balin noticed that Mr. Baggins' waistcoat was more extensive and had real gold buttons.
Mm-hmm.
Bilbo also noticed that Balin's beard was several inches longer, and his jeweled belt was of much magnificence. Yeah. They fell to the talking of their times together, of course, and Bilbo asked how things were going in the lands of the mountain. It seemed they were going very well. Bard had rebuilt the town and dale, and the men had gathered him from the lake and from south and west, and all valleys had become tilled again and rich. And the desolation was now filled with birds and blossoms in spring and fruit and feasting in autumn. And Lake Town was refounded and more prosperous than ever. And much wealth went up and down the running river. And there was friendship in those parts between elves and dwarves and men. The old master had come to a bad end. Bard had given him so much gold for the help of the lake people, but being of the kind that easily catches such disease, he fell under the dragon sickness, and took most of the gold and fled with it, and died of starvation in the waste, deserted by his companions.
Just in case you were wondering, Master, not a good person, don't worry, because he died.
The new master is of a wiser kind than Balin, and very popular, for of course he gets most of the credit for his present prosperity.
Yeah.
There are making songs which say that say in his days the rivers run with gold. The then prophecies of the old songs had turned out to be true after a fashion, said Bilbo. Of course, said Gandalf. And why should there not be proof true? Surely you not disbelieve the prophecies because you had a hand in bringing them about yourself. You don't really suppose, do you, that all your adventures and escapes were managed by mere luck for your sole benefit? You're a very fine person, Mr. Baggins, and I'm very fond of you. But you are only quite a little fellow in a wide world after all. Thank goodness, said Bilbo laughing, and handed him the tobacco jar.
The end. This has been The Hobbit by j.r.r. Tolkien, the first part of The Lord of the Rings. We're going to take next week off, but join us the following Monday at 1:30 p.m. Central for the beginning of The Fellowship of the Rings. So once again, I'm Anne.
I'm Zoe.
And thank you so much for joining us. Bye!
Bye.